November 3, 1935. 6:42 a.m. 6 NYPD officers dragged Stephanie St. Clair from Abyssinian Baptist Church in handcuffs, in front of the entire congregation. They thought a Sunday arrest would humiliate her into silence. By Thursday morning, 22 of them were facing federal investigation. November 3, 1935. 6:42 a.m. The morning light barely touched the stained glass windows of Abyssinian Baptist Church when the doors slammed open. Reverend Adam Clayton Powell Sr. stood at the pulpit, mid-sentence in his sermon about Daniel in the lion's den, when 6 white men in dark suits walked down the center aisle. Not walked. Marched. Their footsteps echoed against the wooden pews like gunshots. The congregation, 300 souls dressed in their Sunday finest, went silent. Stephanie St. Clair sat in the third row, same seat she'd occupied every Sunday for 8 years. Navy blue dress. Pearl necklace. White gloves folded in her lap. Her posture was perfect. It always was. She knew exactly who they were before they reached her pew. The lead officer, Detective John Hanrahan, 135th Street Precinct, badge number 4429, didn't ask. He reached across the elderly woman sitting next to Stephanie and grabbed her arm. "Stephanie St. Clair. You're under arrest." The elderly woman gasped. A child started crying 3 rows back. Stephanie didn't resist. She stood slowly, deliberately, maintaining eye contact with Hanrahan the entire time. She was 5 feet 7 inches, tall for a woman in 1935, and in heels she looked him directly in the eyes. "On what charge?" Her voice was calm, measured. The slight Martinique accent still present after 23 years in Harlem. Illegal gambling operations. Conspiracy. Corruption of public morals. Hanrahan smiled when he said it. He was enjoying this. Behind him, 5 more officers fanned out along the aisle. 2 of them had their hands on their holsters. In a church. On a Sunday morning. In front of children. Reverend Powell raised his hand from the pulpit. "Officers, surely this can wait until after." "This is police business, Reverend." Hanrahan didn't even look at him. He pulled Stephanie toward the aisle. She moved with him, didn't stumble, didn't give him the satisfaction. But as she passed the second row, she turned her head slightly. Her assistant, a young woman named Clair Washington, sat perfectly still, hands folded, face expressionless. Stephanie's lips barely moved. 3 words, spoken so quietly that only Clara could hear. "File number 7. Clara's eyes flickered. A half-second of acknowledgement. Then nothing. The officers dragged Stephanie down the aisle toward the exit. Every eye in the congregation followed them. Mothers pulled their children closer. Men stood from their seats, hands clenched into fists but didn't move. They knew better. 6 armed white cops in Harlem in 1935. Any wrong move meant blood. Stephanie kept her head high. Didn't look down. Didn't look ashamed. Because she wasn't. As they reached the church doors, Hanrahan leaned close to her ear. "You think you're untouchable, don't you, Queenie? Walking around Harlem like you own it. Like you're somebody." His breath smelled like coffee and cigarettes. "You're just another N." Stephanie stopped walking. The officers behind her nearly collided with her back. She turned her head, just enough to look at Hanrahan's face. Her expression didn't change. Didn't harden. Didn't soften. She just looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then she smiled. Not a big smile. Just the corners of her mouth. Like she knew a secret he didn't. 72 hours, she said quietly. Hanrahan's smirk faltered. "What?" "You have 72 hours to enjoy this moment, Detective Hanrahan." Badge number 4429. $250 monthly from Dutch Schultz's operation, March 1933 through October 1935. Thursdays. 11 p.m. Corner of Lenox and 142nd. I'd memorize that address if I were you. You'll be asked about it very soon. The blood drained from Hanrahan's face. Stephanie turned away and walked down the church steps herself. They didn't drag her. She walked. Behind her, she heard one of the other officers whisper, "What the hell was that about?" Hanrahan didn't answer. The police wagon waited at the curb. Cast iron. Barred windows. The kind they used for dangerous criminals. Stephanie climbed inside without assistance. Sat down on the wooden bench. Folded her hands in her lap. Through the barred window she could see Abyssinian Baptist Church. The congregation was pouring out onto the steps now, watching. Reverend Powell stood at the top, his face a mixture of shock and rage. Anne Clara Washington, moving quickly through the crowd, already disappearing around the corner of 138th Street. The wagon doors slammed shut. Stephanie closed her eyes. 72 hours. She'd been preparing for this moment for 5 years. Every bribe documented. Every shakedown recorded. Every corrupt cop photographed. 3 filing cabinets in 3 separate locations. Insurance policies in human form. Witnesses who knew exactly what to do if she was arrested. They thought they were humiliating her. They just activated a bomb with a very short fuse. The wagon lurched forward, heading toward the 135th Street precinct. Stephanie opened her eyes. Thursday morning. That's when they'd understand. By Thursday morning, 22 careers would be over. She just had to wait. Stephanie St. Clair had always been very, very good at waiting. To understand what Stephanie St. Clair set in motion on that Sunday morning, you have to understand who she was by November 1935. Not who the police thought she was. Not who the newspapers called her. Who she actually was. Martinique. A French colonial island in the Caribbean where black residents weren't citizens. They were subjects. Stephanie grew up watching French administrators walk past her mother's laundry business like they owned the air itself. Like the people washing their clothes were furniture. She learned early, power isn't loud. Power is quiet. Power is knowing things other people don't know. Age 26. Stephanie boarded a steamship bound for New York with $10, 1 suitcase, and absolutely no intention of being invisible. She arrived in Harlem on a Tuesday in March. The neighborhood was transforming, black families moving in as white families moved out, creating the largest urban black community in American history. Opportunity and desperation lived on the same block. Stephanie worked as a seamstress first, then a domestic worker. Then she realized something the men around her hadn't figured out yet. Harlem didn't need another enforcer with a gun. Harlem needed someone who could count. The numbers racket, an illegal lottery where players bet pennies on 3-digit numbers drawn from stock exchange figures or horse race results, was already operating in Harlem by 1920. Disorganized. Chaotic. Dozens of small operators cheating their own runners, shortchanging winners, keeping terrible records. Stephanie saw a business drowning in its own inefficiency. By 1923 she'd started her own operation. Not with violence. With accounting. She paid her runners 25% commission, higher than anyone else. She paid winners immediately in full, every single time. She kept meticulous records, who bet what, who won what, who owed what. Ledgers that balanced to the penny. Within 2 years she controlled 40% of Harlem's numbers racket. Within 5 years she was the undisputed queen. By 1930, Stephanie's operation employed over 400 people. Runners, collectors, accountants, lookouts. A corporation disguised as a street lottery. She grossed $200,000 monthly, nearly $4 million in 2025 money, in the middle of the Great Depression. But here's what separated Stephanie from every other numbers operator in New York. She understood that protection wasn't just muscle. Protection was information. She knew which police captains took bribes and which ones didn't. She knew which judges could be bought and which ones couldn't. She knew which politicians needed campaign money and which ones needed scandals buried. And she wrote it all down. 409 Edgecombe Avenue, Sugar Hill. Her apartment. 3 rooms. Mahogany furniture. Bookcases filled with Langston Hughes and W.E.B. Du Bois. And in the back room behind a locked door, 3 filing cabinets. Cabinet 1, financial records. Every number played, every winner paid, every dollar earned. Perfect books that would make the IRS weep with envy. Cabinet 2, employee records. Every runner's name, address, family situation, reliability rating. She knew who needed Christmas bonuses and who needed closer supervision. Cabinet 3, insurance. 5 years of police corruption, documented with the precision of a prosecuting attorney. Ledgers showing protection payments to 47 officers across 3 precincts. Dates. Badge numbers. Amounts. Which officers accepted bribes. Which ones demanded them. Which ones threatened violence if payments were late. But ledgers could be dismissed as forgeries. So Stephanie had photographs. Her runners carried concealed cameras, expensive, difficult to operate but devastatingly effective. Photos of uniformed officers accepting envelopes of cash. Photos of plainclothes detectives meeting with known mobsters. Photos of precinct captains leaving her apartment building at midnight, cash visibly bulging in their coat pockets. And she had witnesses. Shopkeepers who saw the exchanges. Church deacons who overheard the threats. Bartenders who served the drinks while deals were negotiated. All of them signed statements, notarized by one of 3 black lawyers Stephanie kept on retainer. She stored copies in 3 locations: her apartment, a safe deposit box at Carver Federal Savings Bank, and with her attorney, Samuel Battle Jr. For 5 years this arsenal sat waiting, dormant. Stephanie paid her protection money, $2,000 monthly to the 135th Street Precinct, split among Captain William Dodge and his favored detectives. Not because she couldn't fight, because fighting was expensive and inefficient. Until October 1935. 2 things happened that month. First, Dutch Schultz, the white Jewish mobster who'd been trying to muscle into Harlem's numbers racket since 1931, was murdered on October 23. Shot in a Newark tavern by rival gangsters, died the next day. Schultz had been Stephanie's most dangerous enemy for 4 years. She'd fought him with intelligence networks and legal warfare while he'd fought with guns and intimidation. His death didn't sadden her. It complicated things. Because the second thing that happened in October 1935, Captain William Dodge decided Stephanie's protection payments weren't enough anymore. October 17, Thursday night, 11:47 p.m. Dodge came to her apartment personally. Unusual, risky meant he was serious. He sat in her living room, drank her French cognac and told her the new terms. $5,000 a month. Starting November. Stephanie set down her glass. That's more than double. Schultz is dead. The Italians are circling. You need more protection now. Dodge smiled like he was doing her a favor. Think of it as insurance. I already have insurance. Not the kind I'm offering. Stephanie looked at him for a long moment. Captain William Dodge. 22 years on the force. Married. 3 children. House in Queens. Took his first bribe in 1929, 3 months after the stock market crashed. Started small, $50 here, $100 there. By 1935, he was collecting $8,000 monthly from various Harlem operations. She knew all of this because she'd been documenting him since 1930. No, Stephanie said quietly. Dodge stopped smiling. Excuse me? The answer is no. $2,000 monthly. That's the arrangement. I'm not renegotiating. Dodge leaned forward. You think you're special, Queenie? You think being a woman protects you? You think because you throw money at some church and help some families that Harlem will riot if I lock you up? I think, Stephanie said, that you should leave my home now. Dodge stood, slowly. His hand rested on his service revolver for just a moment, a threat, unspoken but clear. You've got 1 week to reconsider. Otherwise, I'm gonna make your life very difficult. And when I'm done, you'll wish you'd paid. He walked to the door, then turned back. You know what your problem is, Stephanie? You forget your place. You're a colored woman running an illegal gambling operation. You think you're a businesswoman. You think you're respectable. He shook his head. But you're just a criminal. And criminals belong in cages. The door closed behind him. Stephanie sat in silence for 5 full minutes. Then she walked to the back room, unlocked the filing cabinet, and pulled out Captain William Dodge's file. It was thick. Very thick. She'd been waiting for the right moment to use this information. Waiting for someone to push too far, to give her legal and moral justification for what would come next. Dodge had just given it to her. But she needed the perfect trigger. A public injustice so egregious that even white newspapers would have to cover it. Something that would make her the victim and them the villains. She didn't have to wait long. 2 weeks later, on November 3, 1935, 6 officers stormed Abyssinian Baptist Church during Sunday service and arrested her in front of 300 witnesses. It was exactly what she needed. They thought they were humiliating her. Breaking her publicly. Showing Harlem that even Queenie could be dragged out in handcuffs. What they actually did was hand her the perfect justification to destroy them. Because Stephanie St. Clair had never needed protection from the police. She'd been collecting evidence to protect herself from them. And on that Sunday morning, sitting in the back of a police wagon, hands folded calmly in her lap, she knew exactly what would happen next. Clara Washington was already moving. File number 7 was already in motion. By Thursday, the world would know what Stephanie had known for 5 years. The NYPD wasn't protecting Harlem. They were extorting it. And she had 72 hours of documentation to prove it. The holding cell at the 135th Street Precinct smelled like sweat, ammonia, and decades of despair. Stephanie sat on the narrow wooden bench, back straight, hands folded. She'd been there 11 hours. No phone call. No attorney. No charges formally filed. Standard intimidation procedure. Outside the cell, officers walked past every 20 minutes. Some stared. Some made comments just loud enough for her to hear. One spat on the floor near the bars. Stephanie didn't react. Didn't look up. Didn't acknowledge them. She was counting minutes in her head. Tracking time with the precision of someone who'd learned to measure every second. 6:42 a.m. Arrested at Abyssinian Baptist Church. 7:15 a.m. Processed at 135th Street Precinct. 7:30 a.m. Clara Washington would have reached the first destination. Stephanie closed her eyes. Allowed herself one moment of satisfaction. The machinery was already moving. Monday 8 a.m. Clara Washington walked into the offices of the New York Amsterdam News at 2293 7th Avenue carrying a brown leather briefcase. She asked for William Kelly, the editor. Told the receptionist it was urgent. Regarding Stephanie St. Clair's arrest. Kelly appeared within 3 minutes. Clara handed him a sealed manila envelope. Thick. Heavy. Mississippi St. Clair instructed me to deliver this if she was arrested on false charges. She said you'd know what to do with it. Kelly opened the envelope. His eyes widened as he flipped through the contents. Photographs. Ledger photocopies. A typed statement from Stephanie, signed and dated October 20, 1935, 2 weeks before her arrest, predicting exactly this scenario. Jesus Christ, Kelly whispered. There are 2 more envelopes being delivered this morning, Clara said calmly. One to the New York Age. One to a reporter at the Herald Tribune. Mississippi St. Clair suggests you coordinate your publication timing. Maximum impact. She turned to leave. Wait, Kelly said. Is all of this verified? Clara looked back at him. Mississippi St. Clair doesn't document things she can't prove. Everything in that envelope has a witness, a photograph, or both. The question isn't whether it's true. The question is whether you're brave enough to print it. She walked out. Kelly stood in his office, envelope in hand, staring at evidence of systematic police corruption spanning 5 years. By 10 a.m., he'd called an emergency editorial meeting. By noon they were typesetting the first story. Monday 2 p.m. The afternoon edition of the Amsterdam News hit the streets. Front page. Above the fold. Harlem's numbers queen arrested in church raid. Community leaders question timing and tactics of Sunday morning arrest. The article described the scene at Abyssinian Baptist Church in vivid detail. 300 witnesses. 6 armed officers. A woman dragged from her pew during worship. But the final 3 paragraphs were what mattered. Sources close to Mrs. St. Clair indicate that her arrest may be connected to her recent refusal to increase protection payments to officers of the 135th Street Precinct. Mrs. St. Clair has alleged that Captain William Dodge demanded $5,000 monthly, more than double her current payments, and threatened retaliation when she refused. The Amsterdam News has obtained documentation that appears to corroborate Mrs. St. Clair's allegations, including financial records and witness statements. We are currently verifying these materials and will publish our findings in subsequent editions. Officers involved in Sunday's arrest include Detective John Hanrahan, badge number 4429, Detective Thomas Murphy, badge number 3847, Officer Richard Callahan, badge number 5192, Officer Vincent Doyle, badge number 4761, Officer Michael Brennan, badge number 5034, and Officer Patrick Sullivan, badge number 4623. All 6 are assigned to the 135th Street Precinct under Captain William Dodge. Badge numbers. Names. Precinct. All printed in a newspaper with 50,000 weekly circulation. By 3 p.m., copies were being read in every barbershop, beauty salon, and street corner in Harlem. By 4 p.m., Captain Dodge was in an emergency meeting with his superior officers. By 5 p.m., the 6 arresting officers were told to stay away from Harlem until further notice. Monday 6:30 p.m. Stephanie was still in her holding cell when Samuel Battle Jr. finally arrived. Her attorney. 31 years old. Son of Samuel Battle Sr., the NYPD's first black police officer. Harvard Law School graduate. Sharp as a surgical blade. They've been blocking me all day, he said through the bars. Claimed they didn't have you in custody. Claimed they didn't know where you were. I had to threaten a writ of habeas corpus before they admitted you were here. Expected, Stephanie said. Did Clara reach you? This morning. I have copies of everything. Battle lowered his voice. Stephanie, this is enough to bring down half the department. Not half. Just the corrupt half. That might be the same thing. Stephanie almost smiled. Did you file the papers? Arraignment is Thursday morning. I tried for earlier but they're stalling. They know something's coming. Thursday is fine. Gives them time to worry. Battle studied her face. You're not scared, are you? I've been preparing for this since 1930, Samuel. Fear is what you feel when you're unprepared. Tuesday 9 a.m. 3 more manila envelopes were delivered simultaneously. One to District Attorney William Copeland Dodge's office at 155 Leonard Street. No relation to Captain William Dodge, but the name coincidence would make newspaper coverage deliciously ironic. One to Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia's office at City Hall. One to NAACP headquarters at 69 Fifth Avenue. Each envelope contained the same materials, photocopied pages from Stephanie's ledgers showing 5 years of protection payments. 47 officers across 3 precincts. Dates, badge numbers, amounts. The 135th Street Precinct under Captain Dodge. The 32nd Precinct under Captain Edward Flynn. The 28th Precinct under Captain Robert Harrison. $73,000 in documented bribes over 5 years. That was just what Stephanie had paid personally. The envelopes included estimates suggesting the total protection racket in Harlem generated over $400,000 annually for corrupt officers. But the ledgers alone could be dismissed. Forgeries, the police would claim. So each envelope also contained photographs. 12 photographs. Crystal clear. Showing uniformed officers accepting cash in broad daylight. Showing plainclothes detectives meeting with known numbers operators. Showing precinct captains leaving Stephanie's building with bulging pockets. And 37 signed, notarized witness statements from shopkeepers, bartenders, church deacons, and Harlem residents who'd witnessed the corruption firsthand. By 11 a.m., District Attorney Dodge had called for a closed-door meeting with NYPD Commissioner Louis Valentine. By 1 p.m., federal investigators from the Justice Department were making phone calls. By 3 p.m., Mayor LaGuardia was privately furious. He'd been elected on a reform platform, promising to clean up Tammany Hall corruption. Now evidence of massive police corruption was sitting on his desk, delivered by a black woman numbers operator who'd been arrested in a church. The optics were catastrophic. Tuesday 4 p.m. The New York Age published their story. Smaller circulation than the Amsterdam News, but equally damaging. Police corruption alleged in St. Clair case. Documentation suggests systematic bribery in 3 Harlem precincts. The article laid out the evidence methodically. Quoted from the witness statements. Referenced the photographs without reproducing them, yet. Promised more details in Wednesday's edition. Most devastatingly, it included a direct quote from Stephanie, recorded 2 weeks before her arrest during an interview with the reporter. I have paid protection money to police officers for 5 years. I have documented every payment. I have witnesses to every transaction. If they arrest me on false charges, I will release everything. The NYPD can have my cooperation or my evidence. Their choice. She told them exactly what would happen. They arrested her anyway. Wednesday 8 a.m. The Herald Tribune, a white newspaper with citywide circulation, published their story on page 4. Harlem numbers operator claims police extortion. Negro woman presents evidence of 5-year bribery scheme. The story was more cautious, more skeptical than the black newspapers. But it was there. In print. In a publication read by white judges, white politicians, white business owners. The story was escaping Harlem now. Spreading across all 5 boroughs. By 9 a.m., the NYPD's Public Relations Office was overwhelmed with press inquiries. By 10 a.m., Commissioner Valentine issued a statement. These allegations are being taken seriously and investigated thoroughly. Officers involved in Sunday's arrest have been reassigned pending the outcome of internal review. Reassigned. Not suspended. Not fired. Reassigned. It wasn't enough. Wednesday 2 p.m. Stephanie was moved from her holding cell to a cleaner cell in the women's section. Given a mattress. Allowed to wash. Brought food that wasn't spoiled. The shift in treatment was immediate and obvious. They were scared now. Wednesday 6 p.m. Federal investigators interviewed their first witnesses. Shopkeepers from Lenox Avenue who'd seen Detective Hanrahan collecting envelopes from numbers runners. A bartender from Small's Paradise who'd overheard Captain Dodge discussing protection payments. The witnesses were nervous. Testifying against police was dangerous, potentially fatal. But they testified anyway. Because Stephanie St. Clair had protected them for years. Had kept their businesses safe, had helped their families, had proven that she kept her word. Now it was their turn to protect her. Wednesday 11 p.m. Samuel Battle Jr. visited Stephanie one final time before Thursday's arraignment. 22 officers have been identified in the federal investigation so far, he said quietly. 3 precinct captains are being questioned. The district attorney's office is privately discussing a deal. Drop all charges against you in exchange for your cooperation in a broader corruption probe. No deal, Stephanie said. Battle blinked. Stephanie, I'm not asking for a deal. I'm demanding an acquittal. Full dismissal of all charges. Public apology. And I want immunity from prosecution in exchange for testimony, not dismissal in exchange for silence. They don't get to quietly sweep this away. That's aggressive. That's justice. Battle smiled despite himself. You really did plan for this. Samuel, I've been planning for this since the day I arrived in Harlem. Since the day I realized that in America, power doesn't come from being right. It comes from being prepared to prove you're right. She stood, walked to the cell bars, looked directly at her attorney. Tomorrow morning when we walk into that courtroom, I want every newspaper in New York there. I want photographers. I want federal investigators in the back row where everyone can see them. I want the prosecutor to understand that this isn't a trial. This is a reckoning. Battle nodded slowly. I'll make the calls. And Samuel? Thank your father for me. He was the first black police officer in this city. He knows better than anyone what corruption looks like. Thursday morning, 6 a.m. Stephanie St. Clair washed her face in the cell sink, smoothed her dress, and checked her reflection in the small metal mirror. 72 hours since her arrest. 72 hours of invisible warfare. 22 officers under investigation. 3 precincts in chaos. Federal involvement. Media firestorm. And she hadn't spoken a single word publicly since Sunday morning. The police wagon would arrive at 8 a.m. to transport her to Manhattan Criminal Court. By 9:30 a.m., the world would understand what Stephanie had always known. You don't beat power by matching its violence. You beat power by documenting its crimes and waiting for it to give you the perfect moment to strike. They gave her that moment when they dragged her from church. Now she was going to finish what they started. November 7, 1935. 8:47 a.m. The police wagon pulled up to Manhattan Criminal Court at 100 Center Street. A 4-story limestone building that smelled like floor wax, stale cigarettes, and broken promises. Stephanie stepped out into camera flashes. Photographers from 6 newspapers lined the courthouse steps. The Amsterdam News. The Age. The Herald Tribune. The Daily News. The Times. Even the Communist Party's Daily Worker. This wasn't a routine arraignment anymore. This was news. Detective Hanrahan and Officer Murphy escorted her up the steps, one on each arm. They weren't rough, not with cameras watching, but they weren't gentle either. A reporter from the Amsterdam News shouted, "Mrs. St. Clair, do you have a statement?" Stephanie looked directly at the camera. Didn't smile. Didn't frown. Just looked. "Justice doesn't require statements," she said. "It requires evidence." Inside, the courthouse corridor was chaos. Lawyers in dark suits rushed between courtrooms. Defendants sat on wooden benches, waiting for their names to be called. The sharp echo of footsteps on marble floors. They led Stephanie to courtroom 3B on the 2nd floor. The door opened. The courtroom was packed. Every seat filled. Standing room only in the back. At least 75 people crammed into a space designed for 50. Half of Harlem had shown up. Front row, left side. Reverend Adam Clayton Powell Sr., still wearing his minister's collar. Beside him, 3 deacons from Abyssinian Baptist Church. Front row, right side, Clara Washington. Her hands folded. Face expressionless. But her eyes tracked Stephanie's every movement. Middle rows, shopkeepers, numbers runners, Harlem residents whose rent Stephanie had paid, whose businesses she'd protected, whose children she'd fed during the Depression. Back row, 3 men in gray suits. Federal investigators. They weren't hiding. They wanted to be seen. And sitting alone in the last row, far right corner, a young black man in a perfectly tailored navy suit. 27 years old. Tall. Calm. Watchful. Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson. He worked for Stephanie. Had since 1932. Started as muscle, became her most trusted enforcer, but more importantly, became someone who understood that intelligence mattered more than intimidation. He nodded once at Stephanie. She didn't acknowledge him. Didn't need to. The judge's bench was empty. They were waiting. Stephanie sat at the defendant's table beside Samuel Battle Jr. He'd already arranged his papers with military precision. 3 folders. Color-coded. Red folder. Motion to dismiss all charges. Blue folder. Civil rights violation lawsuit. Black folder. The nuclear option. "Everyone's here," Battle whispered. Federal investigators confirmed their presence. Every major newspaper has reporters present. The commissioner sent 2 representatives. They're standing in the back, pretending to observe. And the prosecutor? Stephanie asked. Assistant District Attorney Martin Conroy. He looks like he hasn't slept in 3 days. Stephanie glanced at the prosecution table. Conroy was mid-40s, thinning hair, deep circles under his eyes. He was shuffling papers like he was looking for something that wasn't there. Where are the arresting officers? She asked. Battle scanned the room. Not here. That's unusual. In an arraignment, arresting officers typically testify to probable cause. They're not here, Stephanie said quietly, because their superiors don't want them answering questions under oath. At 9:12 a.m., a door behind the bench opened. All rise. Everyone stood. Judge Edwin Cooper entered. 61 years old. White. Appointed by a reform mayor in 1933. Reputation for fairness, which in 1935 New York meant he occasionally ruled in favor of black defendants when the evidence was overwhelming. He sat. Everyone else sat. Cooper looked at the packed courtroom, raised an eyebrow, then looked down at the file in front of him. People vs. Stephanie St. Clair. Case number 7834. Charges: operating an illegal gambling enterprise, conspiracy to commit fraud, corruption of public morals. He looked up. How does the defendant plead? Samuel Battle Jr. stood. Your Honor, before we enter a plea, the defense moves to dismiss all charges on grounds of unlawful arrest, violation of civil rights, and prosecutorial misconduct. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Cooper frowned. That's a significant motion, Counselor. Do you have evidence to support these claims? Substantial evidence, Your Honor. Conroy stood quickly. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defendant was lawfully arrested pursuant to. I'll hear the defense motion, Cooper interrupted. Proceed, Mr. Battle. Battle opened the red folder. Your Honor, on November 3, 1935, at approximately 6:42 a.m., 6 officers from the 135th Street Precinct forcibly arrested Mrs. St. Clair during Sunday morning worship at Abyssinian Baptist Church. They provided no warrant. They did not allow her to contact legal counsel. They held her for over 30 hours without formal charges. Your Honor, Conroy interjected, the defendant is a known criminal operator. Flight risk justified. Mrs. St. Clair has lived at the same address for 12 years, Battle said smoothly. She attends the same church every Sunday. She has never missed a court appearance. Flight risk is pretextual. He pulled a document from the folder. Furthermore, Your Honor, we have evidence that this arrest was retaliatory in nature. 2 weeks prior to her arrest, Mrs. St. Clair refused to pay increased protection money to officers of the 135th Street Precinct. Specifically, she refused Captain William Dodge's demand for $5,000 monthly, more than double her existing payments. The courtroom went dead silent. Cooper leaned forward. Counselor, are you accusing police officers of extortion? I'm presenting evidence of it, Your Honor. Battle lifted a thick stack of papers from the red folder. I have here photocopied pages from Mrs. St. Clair's financial ledgers, covering January 1930 through October 1935. 5 years of documented protection payments to officers of the 135th Street, 32nd and 28th precincts. Dates, badge numbers, amounts. Every payment documented. Conroy's face went pale. Your Honor, these are unverified documents. Anyone could fabricate. I also have, Battle continued, his voice rising slightly, 12 photographs showing uniformed officers accepting cash payments from known numbers operators. I have 37 signed, notarized witness statements from Harlem residents who observed these transactions. And I have Mrs. St. Clair's own testimony, which she is prepared to give under oath. He turned to face the courtroom. Additionally, Your Honor, I note the presence of 3 federal investigators in this courtroom. They are here because the United States Department of Justice is now investigating systematic police corruption in Harlem based on evidence provided by my client. Every head in the courtroom turned to look at the 3 men in gray suits. They didn't move, didn't confirm, didn't deny. Their presence was confirmation enough. Cooper set down his pen. Slowly. Mr. Conroy, are you aware of this federal investigation? Conroy opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Your Honor, I was informed yesterday that certain allegations were being reviewed, but I have no direct knowledge of. Where are the arresting officers? Cooper asked sharply. Silence. Mr. Conroy, I asked you a question. The 6 officers who arrested Mrs. St. Clair on Sunday morning, why? Conroy stood frozen at the prosecution table, mouth half open, searching for words that wouldn't come. Judge Cooper's patience was evaporating. Mr. Conroy. The arresting officers. Where are they? Your Honor, Conroy glanced at the 2 NYPD representatives standing in the back of the courtroom. Neither made eye contact. I was informed this morning that due to ongoing departmental reviews, the officers have been temporarily reassigned and are unavailable for testimony at this time. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbling furiously. Harlem residents shouting questions. Reverend Powell shaking his head in disgust. Cooper slammed his gavel 3 times. Order. I will have order in this courtroom. The noise subsided to angry murmurs. Cooper turned back to Conroy, his face hardening. Counselor, you're telling me that in a criminal arraignment, not one of the 6 arresting officers is available to testify to probable cause? That is correct, Your Honor. And you find nothing unusual about this? Conroy's silence was answer enough. Cooper looked down at the case file, then at Samuel Battle Jr., defense counsel. You mentioned additional evidence. I'd like to see it. Battle opened the black folder. The nuclear option. He pulled out a document. 47 pages. Bound. Professionally typed. Index. Your Honor, this is a comprehensive affidavit prepared by Mrs. St. Clair, signed and notarized on October 20, 1935, 2 weeks before her arrest. In it, she details 5 years of systematic police corruption, predicts potential retaliation for her refusal to increase protection payments, and declares her intent to release all evidence to federal authorities and the press should she be arrested on false charges. He walked forward, handed the document to the bailiff, who delivered it to Judge Cooper. Cooper began reading. His expression shifted from skepticism to surprise to barely contained anger. The courtroom waited in breathless silence. Stephanie sat perfectly still, hands folded on the table in front of her. Her face revealed nothing. But inside she was counting. 5 years of preparation. 72 hours of execution. This moment, right now, was the fulcrum point where everything would tip one direction or the other. Cooper looked up from the affidavit. Mr. Battle, this document references Captain William Dodge by name. It alleges that he personally demanded increased payments and explicitly threatened Mrs. St. Clair with arrest if she refused. That is correct, Your Honor. And you have evidence corroborating these allegations? Battle turned to Stephanie. She reached into the leather folio she'd been allowed to keep, pulled out a single photograph, and handed it to her attorney. He walked it to the bench. Your Honor, this photograph was taken on October 17, 1935, at approximately 11:52 p.m., outside Mrs. St. Clair's residence at 409 Edgecombe Avenue. It shows Captain William Dodge leaving her building. The timestamp is visible in the corner, one of Mrs. St. Clair's security precautions. Cooper studied the photograph. This shows an officer leaving a building. It doesn't prove extortion. Your Honor, Stephanie said quietly. Everyone turned. It was the first time she'd spoken since entering the courtroom. Cooper looked at her. Mrs. St. Clair? She stood slowly. Samuel Battle tried to stop her. Defendants didn't typically speak directly to judges, but she gently moved his hand aside. Your Honor, may I approach? Cooper hesitated, then nodded. You may. Stephanie walked to the bench. Every eye in the courtroom followed her. She stood 5 feet from Judge Cooper, looked him directly in the eyes, and spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. That photograph shows Captain Dodge leaving my home at midnight after demanding $5,000 monthly protection payments. I have a witness who was present during that conversation. My assistant, Clara Washington, sitting in the 3rd row. She will testify under oath to exactly what was said. She paused, let that settle. I also have recordings, Your Honor. The courtroom exploded. Cooper's gavel came down like thunder. What did you say? I have recordings of 3 conversations between myself and Captain Dodge. October 3rd, October 10th, and October 17th. Recorded using a dictaphone machine I purchased specifically for this purpose. The recordings are stored in a safe location and can be produced within 2 hours. Conroy shot to his feet. Your Honor, such recordings would be inadmissible. New York is a 2-party consent state. Actually, Battle interjected smoothly, case law on telephonic recording is still developing. But more importantly, these recordings weren't made for prosecution. They were made for Mrs. St. Clair's personal protection. Their evidentiary value in a criminal case against Captain Dodge is debatable. Their value in establishing that my client had reasonable cause to fear retaliation is absolute. Cooper leaned back in his chair. He looked at Stephanie for a long moment. Mrs. St. Clair, why didn't you come forward with this evidence before your arrest? The courtroom went silent again. Stephanie's answer was calm, measured, devastating. Your Honor, I am a black woman, a Caribbean immigrant, an illegal gambling operator. If I had walked into a police station or a district attorney's office and accused a white police captain of extortion, what do you think would have happened to me? Cooper said nothing. I would have been arrested immediately. My evidence would have disappeared. Witnesses would have been intimidated or worse. And I would be sitting in a cell right now with no voice, no platform and no protection. She gestured to the packed courtroom. But when they arrested me in a church on a Sunday morning in front of 300 witnesses, including a respected reverend and half of Harlem's community leaders, they gave me something I could never have created myself. What's that? Cooper asked quietly. Moral authority, public sympathy, and a reason for good people to pay attention. The silence was absolute. Stephanie turned slightly, addressing the entire courtroom now, not just the judge. I'm not a good person, Your Honor. I run an illegal gambling operation. I break the law every single day. I don't deny that. But I pay my people fairly. I protect my community. I keep my word. And when police officers demand more money than we agreed to, when they threaten me, intimidate my employees, and arrest me in God's house to humiliate me, I don't respond with violence. She turned back to Cooper. I respond with evidence. She reached into her jacket pocket, slowly so no one would panic, and pulled out a small key. This key opens a safe deposit box at Carver Federal Savings Bank. Inside that box are the original recordings, original ledgers, original photographs, and original witness statements. Everything Mr. Battle has shown you today is a copy. The originals are untouchable, protected, waiting. She placed the key on the judge's bench. You can dismiss these charges against me, or you can proceed with prosecution. But either way, that evidence exists. And whether it comes out in this courtroom or in a federal investigation or on the front page of every newspaper in New York, it's coming out. She looked at Conroy. Then at the two NYPD representatives in the back. You arrested me to silence me. You gave me a megaphone instead. Cooper picked up the key, turned it over in his fingers. Then he looked at Conroy. Mr. Conroy, does the prosecution wish to proceed with this case? Conroy looked like a man drowning. He glanced back at the NYPD representatives again. One of them, a deputy inspector with graying hair, gave the smallest shake of his head. Conroy turned back to the judge. His voice was barely above a whisper. Your Honor, in light of the complex circumstances surrounding this case and the ongoing federal review, the people request permission to dismiss all charges against the defendant without prejudice. Without prejudice? Battle snapped. Your Honor, that language allows them to refile charges at any time. We demand dismissal with prejudice. Full and complete exoneration. Cooper looked at Conroy. The defense's point is well taken. Mr. Conroy? Conroy closed his eyes. With prejudice, Your Honor. Cooper's gavel came down once. Sure. Final. All charges against Stephanie St. Clair are dismissed with prejudice. The defendant is free to go. The Harlem section of the courtroom erupted in cheers. But Stephanie didn't smile. Didn't celebrate. She simply nodded once at the judge, picked up her folio and turned to leave. Samuel Battle grabbed her arm gently. Stephanie, wait. We should discuss the civil rights lawsuit, Later, she said quietly. Right now, I'm going home. She walked toward the courtroom exit. The crowd parted for her like water. As she reached the back row, Bumpy Johnson stood. Fell into step beside her without a word. The three federal investigators watched her pass. One of them, the oldest with steel-gray hair, nodded respectfully. Stephanie nodded back. Outside the courtroom, the corridor was chaos. Reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, people trying to touch her, congratulate her, thank her. Bumpy moved ahead, clearing a path with his physical presence. Not violent. Just there. Immovable. They made it to the courthouse steps. More cameras. More reporters. One of them, a young white man from the Herald Tribune, managed to get close enough to shout a question. Mrs. St. Clair. What happens now? Are you going to testify against the NYPD? Stephanie stopped on the courthouse steps. Looked directly at the cameras. I'm going to do what I've always done. Run my business. Protect my community. And keep extremely detailed records. She started down the steps again, then paused. Turned back. And to the 22 officers currently under investigation, you knew the terms. You broke them. What happens next is on you. She descended the steps, climbed into the black Packard waiting at the curb, her car driven by Clara Washington, and drove away. Behind her, the courthouse was still in chaos. Reporters filing stories. Federal investigators comparing notes. NYPD representatives trying to contain the damage. Inside the Packard, Stephanie finally allowed herself to exhale. "You did it," Clara said from the driver's seat, her voice filled with quiet awe. "We did it," Stephanie corrected. "None of this works without you. Without the runners who kept records. Without the shopkeepers who testified. Without every person who chose to trust me. What now?" Stephanie looked out the window at Harlem passing by. Her Harlem. The neighborhood she'd protected, fought for, bled for. Now we go back to work. Dutch Schultz is dead. The Italians will move into the vacuum. We have maybe 3 weeks before someone tries to take my territory. Are you ready for that fight? Stephanie smiled. Small. Controlled. Dangerous. Clara, I just destroyed 22 police officers without firing a single shot. Do you really think I'm worried about mobsters? The car turned onto Edgecombe Avenue. Stephanie St. Clair was going home. And in 3 precincts across Manhattan, 22 police officers were beginning to understand that they'd made a catastrophic miscalculation. They thought power came from badges and guns. Stephanie had just proven it came from something much more dangerous. Documentation, patience, and perfect timing. November 1935 became a month Harlem would never forget. Within 2 weeks of Stephanie's courtroom victory, 6 officers were fired outright. Detective John Hanrahan, the man who'd grabbed her arm in church, was terminated on November 19th. No pension. No benefits. Gone. 16 others faced departmental tribunals. Most received suspensions ranging from 6 months to 2 years without pay. Their careers were functionally over. In 1935, a suspended cop didn't come back from that kind of publicity. Captain William Dodge fought the charges for 3 weeks. Hired an attorney. Claimed the evidence was fabricated. Insisted he'd never taken a bribe in his 22-year career. Then the recordings were played for federal investigators. His voice. Stephanie's voice. October 17, 1935, 11:43 p.m. 5,000 a month, Stephanie. That's the new rate. That's extortion, Captain. That's business. You pay or I make your life very difficult. Dodge resigned on December 3rd. Moved his family to Philadelphia. Died of a heart attack in 1941, 6 years later, working as a private security guard at a department store. The federal investigation expanded beyond the initial 22 officers. By March 1936, 43 officers across Manhattan had been implicated in protection rackets. The scandal reached high enough that Police Commissioner Louis Valentine launched a comprehensive internal review that lasted 18 months. It didn't end corruption in the NYPD. Not even close. But it ended the idea that corruption was untouchable. And it proved that a black woman with a filing cabinet could do what politicians, reformers, and federal agents had failed to do for decades. Force accountability through sheer, meticulous documentation. Stephanie continued running her numbers operation for another decade. She faced more legal challenges. More rivals. The Italian mafia, particularly the Genovese and Luciano families, made several attempts to absorb her territory after Dutch Schultz's death. They failed. Not because Stephanie outgunned them. She didn't. She never tried to. She survived because she'd learned the fundamental lesson of immigrant success in America. Power isn't about being the strongest. It's about being the most indispensable. Harlem needed her. She employed hundreds of people during the Depression when legitimate jobs paid starvation wages or didn't exist at all. She funded churches, paid medical bills, covered rent for families on the edge of eviction. When the Italians tried to move in, Harlem closed ranks around her. Runners refused to switch sides. Customers refused to play the Italian numbers. Shopkeepers refused to cooperate with the new operators. The mob had guns and money. Stephanie had something more powerful. Loyalty earned over 15 years of keeping her promises. By 1940, the major crime families stopped trying to push her out. It wasn't worth the effort. They cut deals instead, territory divisions, profit-sharing arrangements, mutual non-interference pacts. Stephanie negotiated those deals herself. No male intermediary. No husband speaking for her. Just her, sitting across from men who'd killed for less than what she was asking, and walking away with terms she dictated. She married twice. Both marriages were complicated, sometimes violent, ultimately tragic in different ways. She was arrested 7 more times between 1935 and 1953, beat most of the charges, served short sentences for the ones she didn't. In 1960, at age 74, she finally stepped away from the numbers racket. Not because she was forced out, because the game was changing. The Italian mafia was consolidating control. The neighborhood was shifting. The people she'd protected were dying or moving away. She lived quietly in Harlem for another 9 years. Died in 1969 at age 83. Heart failure. Her obituary in the New York Times was 4 paragraphs. Described her as a numbers operator and controversial figure. Made no mention of her victory against police corruption. No mention of how she'd protected an entire community for 3 decades. History tried to erase her. Failed. Because here's what Stephanie St. Clair proved in November 1935. Intelligence beats violence. Strategy beats strength. Documentation beats denial. A woman's power doesn't require permission from men. It requires preparation, courage, and the willingness to fight battles on ground of her choosing. An immigrant's success isn't about assimilation. It's about understanding the system well enough to exploit its weaknesses. And justice, real justice, doesn't come from institutions. It comes from people brave enough to gather evidence, wait for the right moment, and refuse to be intimidated into silence. The Sunday morning they dragged her from church, they thought they were ending her. They activated a weapon that had been waiting 5 years to detonate. 22 police careers destroyed. An entire department forced to reckon with its corruption. A federal investigation that lasted years. And a black Caribbean woman walking out of court with her head high and her empire intact. They couldn't arrest what she represented. They couldn't intimidate what she'd documented. They couldn't erase what she'd proven. Stephanie St. Clair taught Harlem, and anyone paying attention, a lesson that echoes 90 years later. They can arrest your body. They cannot arrest your preparation. Power isn't loud. Power isn't violent. Power is a woman sitting calmly in a holding cell, counting down 72 hours, knowing exactly what's about to happen. Power is a filing cabinet full of truth, waiting for the perfect moment to speak. Power is refusing to play by their rules while using their own system to destroy them. That's the legacy they couldn't take from Stephanie St. Clair. That's the story they tried to bury. That's why we remember her name. Queenie. Madame St. Clair. The numbers queen of Harlem. The woman who turned an arrest into a reckoning. And changed the game forever.